Secrets of the Roman Emperors. Before empires rose and borders hardened into stone, a single city learned how to command the world. Rome did not begin with emperors. It began with fear, with ambition, with men who discovered that power could outlive the body. Beneath banners stitched with the eagle, authority took a new shape, absolute, sacred, and terrifying. Picture this, the sun rising over the forum, its light touching marble temples and blood-darkened stones. Senators gather in silence. Soldiers stand unmoving. Somewhere behind thick walls, a single man wakes knowing the world will obey his voice today. Rome would call him emperor. The people would call him lord. History would decide what he truly was. Rome crowned its rulers not only with gold, but with expectation. An emperor was more than a king. He was law, general, judge, and sometimes God. Statues carved his likeness into eternity, yet the man himself lived under constant pressure, watched by rivals, guarded by soldiers who could become executioners, praised by crowds whose love could turn to fury overnight. In the shadow of the temple, prayers were offered not just to the old gods, but to living men. Incense burned for emperors who demanded worship, while whispers spread through corridors about poison, betrayal, and midnight knives. Power in Rome was never secure. It breathed, shifted, and hunted its owner. Behind triumphal arches and victory parades lay private chambers filled with doubt. Emperors feared their friends, tested their families, and slept lightly, knowing that death often arrived without warning. Some sought glory, others sought survival. Many lost both. This is not the Rome preserved in textbooks and dates. This is Rome as it was lived, by men trapped at the summit of the world, carrying the weight of millions on their conscience. Here, power was never free. It demanded loyalty, blood, and sanity. And beneath the eagle's shadow, every ruler paid the price. Chapter 1. The Birth of Imperial Power. Before empires rose, Rome was a city at war with itself. The stones of the Forum had heard too many speeches, seen too many promises broken by ambition. Republic was the word Rome loved, but civil war was the truth it lived. Blood stained the roads from Gaul to Greece, and every victory carried the weight of another betrayal. In this fractured world, the people did not dream of freedom. They dreamed of rest. Picture this, smoke lifting from burned fields, veterans returning with empty eyes, senators whispering in corners once meant for debate. The Republic had survived kings, invasions, and rebellion, but it could not survive itself. Power had grown too large, too personal. Men like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar bent the state around their wills. Laws became weapons. Loyalty followed generals, not institutions. When Julius Caesar fell beneath the knives of senators, Rome did not return to balance. It plunged deeper into fear. His death did not end tyranny. It proved how helpless the Republic had become. Crowds wept for the man they once feared. Armies waited for the next banner to follow. Order no longer lived in tradition. It waited for a ruler. From this silence stepped a young man named Gaius Octavius. He was thin, quiet, often ill, no war hero, no roaring orator. Yet Caesar had named him heir, and in Rome, names carried destiny. Octavian did not seize power with thunder. He studied the ruins first. He watched how fear moved men. He learned that Rome no longer trusted strength alone. It wanted stability disguised as memory. In the shadow of the temple, Octavian spoke of restoration. He promised the Republic would live again. He claimed no crown, wore no royal purple. Instead, he called himself Princeps, first citizen. The title sounded harmless, almost humble, but beneath the words lay control sharper than any sword. History records this moment carefully. In 27 BCE, Octavian stood before the Senate and offered to return power to them. The gesture was theater, and Rome accepted the performance. The Senate, weakened and afraid, begged him to stay. They granted him new authority, new honors, and a new name, Augustus, the revered one, not king, not dictator, something older, almost divine. The empire was born quietly. Legions still marched, but now they marched for peace. Temples still stood, but now they honored stability. Coins bore Augustus's face, spreading his image into every hand. Art, architecture, and ritual were reshaped to remind Rome that chaos was over. Fear softened into loyalty. Memory was edited into myth. Yet this calm had a price. Augustus controlled the army. He controlled the treasury. He controlled appointments, laws, and religion. The Senate debated, but only within the space he allowed. The Republic still existed in name, but its spirit had been carefully folded away. Rome told itself it had chosen order. In truth, it had surrendered it. In private chambers, Augustus understood the danger of what he had created. Power once gathered resists return. He worked tirelessly to make his rule appear temporary, lawful, and necessary. He avoided excess. He punished corruption publicly. He rebuilt temples to honor the old gods. Every action whispered the same message. This is not tyranny, this is salvation. The people believed because they needed to believe. After decades of war, peace felt holy. The roads were safe. Grain flowed into the city. Children grew up without hearing marching feet at dawn. This era would be remembered as the Pax Romana, a peace stretching across the Mediterranean. To many, Augustus was not a ruler, he was a healer. But history listens beneath celebration. Once Rome accepted that one man could guard peace, it accepted that one man could decide truth. The Senate no longer challenged power, it adjusted to it. Future rulers would not need Augustus's restraint. They would inherit his structure without his caution. In the silence after applause faded, a dangerous lesson remained. Rome had traded uncertainty for certainty, debate for command, many voices for one will. The Republic had not fallen in flames. It had drifted to sleep, wrapped in comfort. Augustus ruled for over 40 years. When he died, Rome mourned as though a father had passed. His final words, recorded by tradition, asked whether he had played his part well. The stage he left behind would answer for centuries. Because now, the empire could not imagine itself without an emperor. In the shadow of the eagle, future rulers would not ask permission. They would not pretend. They would demand worship, obedience, and silence. Some would seek glory. Others would drown in fear. All would stand on the foundation Augustus laid, an illusion of shared power covering absolute control. Rome had found peace, but it had also set a trap for itself. Once power belonged to one man, it could never fully return to the many. The birth of imperial rule felt gentle, almost merciful. Yet beneath the calm beginning slept a truth as old as empire itself. When authority gathers into a single hand, history listens closely, because what is created to save a nation can also reshape its soul forever. Chapter 2: Gods Among Mortal Men. Before temples crowned living rulers, Rome's gods had lived at a distance. They watched from high places, carved in stone, honored with sacrifice, but untouched by human breath. Power belonged to men. Divinity belonged to myth. That boundary once felt permanent. Yet as emperors ruled longer and the memory of the Republic faded, Rome began to blur the line between mortal authority and divine right. Picture this: incense rising through a marble hall, its smoke curling around a statue that looks almost alive. The face is familiar, the posture proud. This god wears the features of a man still breathing somewhere beyond the city walls. In Rome, the impossible had become acceptable. The ruler was no longer chosen by the gods, he was becoming one. The transformation did not happen all at once. Augustus had been careful. During his life, he allowed worship only in the provinces, where loyalty needed ritual more than restraint. In Rome itself, divinity waited until death. Temples honored his spirit, not his body. It was a compromise between tradition and ambition, but compromises rarely survive success. As generations passed, emperors inherited more than armies and laws. They inherited expectation. The empire stretched across cultures where kings had long been gods on earth. To rule such lands, authority had to feel eternal. Coins began to carry not just imperial faces, but sacred language. Titles grew heavier: son of a god, lord of the world, savior of mankind. In the shadow of the temple, loyalty changed its shape. To obey the emperor was no longer simply civic duty. It was devotion. Refusal became heresy. To question imperial authority was to offend heaven itself. History records how temples rose not only to Jupiter and Mars, but to emperors whose reigns promised stability. Priests offered sacrifices in their names. Festivals marked their birthdays like holy days. In distant cities, people who would never see Rome learned to kneel before imperial images. Power traveled faster when wrapped in belief. Yet divinity came with a hidden cost. To be called a god is to be separated from truth. Praise filled imperial courts, thick and constant. Every word spoken to an emperor was weighed, softened, reshaped to please. Honest counsel became rare. Fear learned to smile. Emperors like Tiberius felt this isolation deeply. He withdrew from Rome, ruling from a distance, suspicious of every voice. Others, like Caligula, embraced godhood openly, demanding worship and punishing doubt. He appeared in divine costumes, spoke as a living deity, and forced the Senate to bow. Rome watched in silence, unsure whether it was witnessing madness or revelation. The line no longer mattered. What mattered was survival. In claiming divinity, emperors gained obedience, but lost companionship. Every smile concealed ambition. Every silence hinted at betrayal. Friends became potential threats. Family became rivals. Even the gods of old seemed distant, replaced by the emperor's own reflection staring back from polished bronze. The empire responded with rituals meant to reassure itself. Worship created order, order created peace, but beneath the ceremonies lay unease. Romans had always feared kings. Now they feared gods who could order executions. This system held because belief is powerful, even when fragile. Many did not truly believe emperors were divine, but belief was no longer required. Participation was enough. Bowing became habit. Habit became obedience. And yet, divinity did not protect emperors from death. Poison still worked. Daggers still found flesh. Praetorian guards still listened to bribes. When a god-emperor fell, his statues were torn down, his name erased, his memory condemned. Rome practiced damnatio memoriae, the ritual killing of legacy. A god could be unmade by decree. This contradiction haunted the empire. If a god could be erased, what kind of god had Rome created? In the quiet after ceremonies ended, emperors remained human. They aged. They feared illness. They dreamed of plots whispered in dark corridors. Divinity did not silence doubt. It amplified it. A god must never appear weak, and so weakness was hidden until it poisoned the soul. As Christianity later spread through the empire, it challenged this fragile system. It refused emperor worship, not with swords, but with belief in a higher authority. Rome responded with persecution, not because Christians threatened armies, but because they threatened meaning. If the emperor was not divine, then power stood naked again. The age of god-emperors revealed a truth Rome struggled to accept. Authority can command obedience, but it cannot command faith without consequence. When rulers claim heaven, they risk losing earth. In the end, emperors who reached for divinity gained silence, not love, reverence, not trust. Their reign stood on ritual and fear, not loyalty freely given. And so, among marble temples and sacred fires, Rome learned a quiet lesson. When men declare themselves gods, they rise above humanity, but lose its warmth forever. Chapter 3: Bloodlines and Broken Heirs. In the heart of Rome, behind walls veined with marble and guarded by silent steel, the future of the empire was meant to be secure. Palaces were built not only as homes, but as vaults for legacy. Blood, Rome believed, could anchor power. A son would follow a father. A name would outlive a body. Order would pass quietly from one generation to the next. But blood, once spilled into politics, rarely runs clean. In the shadow of the palace, children grew up surrounded by splendor and suspicion. They learned to walk across mosaic floors before they learned trust. Tutors taught them history and rhetoric, but life taught harsher lessons. Survival at the summit required vigilance. Love was conditional. Affection could be weaponized. Rome's emperors looked to family as a solution to chaos, yet family became the most dangerous battlefield of all. Augustus himself struggled with this truth. He had forged an empire but could not forge a clear heir. Death claimed his chosen successors one by one: Marcellus, Gaius, Lucius. Each loss deepened the sense that destiny resisted order. When Tiberius finally inherited the throne, it was not celebration that followed, but unease. Rome had learned that inheritance did not guarantee stability, it only delayed conflict. As generations passed, succession hardened into ritual, but never into peace. Sons of emperors lived under a constant shadow. They were raised to rule, yet reminded daily how fragile favor could be. One mistake could mean exile. One rumor could mean death. They watched their fathers rule through fear and loyalty intertwined, and learned that mercy was rarely rewarded. Brothers became rivals not by choice, but by design. The empire could only have one master. Every other heir was a threat by mere existence. In this world, childhood ended early. Trust was a luxury few could afford. Mothers understood this more clearly than anyone. Imperial women wielded influence without crowns. They moved through corridors quietly, listening, advising, shaping outcomes behind closed doors. Some, like Livia, wife of Augustus, became legends of calculated restraint. Others, like Agrippina the Younger, wielded ambition openly, guiding sons toward power while removing obstacles with patience and poison. History does not always record their actions clearly, but whispers echo through ancient texts. Sudden illnesses, convenient accidents, deaths that came just as rivals grew strong. In Rome, inheritance invited suspicion, and suspicion often proved justified. The palace, meant to preserve legacy, became a place of constant watchfulness. Servants listened. Guards reported. Friends disappeared. Food was tasted by slaves trained to die first. Sleep came lightly, if at all. Emperors learned, often too late, that no enemy was more dangerous than kin. Caligula's reign exposed this reality in blood. Raised amid conspiracies, he inherited both absolute power and deep paranoia. He eliminated family members swiftly, convinced that survival required elimination. His actions shocked Rome, but they followed a logic shaped by inheritance itself. When succession is uncertain, cruelty feels like caution. Claudius, unlikely and underestimated, survived only because he was ignored. His rise did not end the cycle. His household became dominated by intrigue, marriage, and manipulation. His son Britannicus was sidelined. His adopted heir, Nero, was elevated. Poison resolved what politics could not. Succession was never a public war. It was quieter, colder. It unfolded behind curtains of silk and marble, far from the legions and crowds. Decisions were made in whispers, not speeches. The empire watched only the outcome, never the struggle. Even the idea of adoption, used by some emperors to choose capable heirs, did not escape danger. Chosen sons carried expectation without blood protection. They too became targets. Loyalty shifted quickly. Guards followed power, not lineage. Rome's belief in family as a foundation of order slowly eroded. Bloodlines produced heirs, but not harmony. Each transition reminded the empire that stability rested on fragile ground. The people sensed it. Murals and statues celebrated continuity, but rumors traveled faster than stone. Every emperor's illness stirred fear. Every death threatened uncertainty. Peace depended on a single life remaining intact. Over time, emperors responded by tightening control. They removed potential rivals early. They exiled relatives. They erased names from memory. Damnatio memoriae was not only punishment, it was prevention. A forgotten heir could not return. Yet erasure did not heal the wound. It deepened it. By the 2nd century, Rome began to experiment with a different idea: chosen succession based on merit, not blood. For a time, it worked. Capable rulers adopted capable heirs. The empire flourished. But even this solution proved temporary. Ambition always found a way back into blood. The lesson remained painfully clear. Power magnifies family bonds until they break. Love becomes leverage. Loyalty becomes liability. The closer one stands to the throne, the closer one stands to danger. In the end, Rome learned that inheritance could not tame power. It only concentrated fear within the home meant to guard the future. Among polished marble halls and guarded chambers, the empire's fate was decided not by armies, but by families locked in quiet war. And the blood meant to secure Rome's tomorrow often spilled to protect today. The echo of that truth still lingers. When power is absolute, even family becomes a battlefield, and legacy, a risk no bloodline can fully survive. Chapter 4: The Madness of Absolute Authority. Before reason failed, silence arrived first. In the great halls of Rome, where voices once debated law and fate, words grew careful and rare. Advisors learned when to speak and when to bow. Truth, once dangerous, became fatal. This was how madness entered the empire, not as a sudden break, but as a slow permission to believe that no voice mattered but one. In the shadow of the palace, power pressed inward. Absolute authority does not announce its corruption. It erodes. It bends judgment, rewards impulse, and punishes restraint. When no law can refuse a ruler, desire replaces reason. What begins as command ends as obsession. Caligula was not born a monster. He was raised in fear. As a child, he watched his family destroyed by suspicion and exile. He learned early that survival required masks. When he became emperor, Rome celebrated. The young ruler promised mercy, games, and generosity. For a brief moment, hope returned. Then the limits vanished. With no barrier between thought and action, Caligula's impulses became decrees. He humiliated senators, demanded worship, and blurred performance with power. Cruelty became entertainment. Executions became spectacle. History remembers his excesses with disbelief, yet they followed a simple logic. When consequence disappears, restraint loses meaning. Madness in this world was not only illness, it was authority without correction. Rome endured, watching carefully. When Caligula fell to assassins, the empire exhaled, but it did not change. The structure remained intact, waiting for the next will to occupy it. Nero inherited that structure as a teenager, guided at first by philosophers and generals. Under their influence, the empire knew calm. Art flourished. The court breathed again. But guidance requires limits, and limits require acceptance. As Nero grew older, he grew impatient with counsel. He wanted admiration without criticism, applause without judgment. As truth retreated, flattery advanced. Advisors learned to praise his voice, his performances, his vision. Nero believed himself an artist chosen by fate. Rome became his stage. When the great fire consumed the city, rumors followed him like smoke. Whether guilty or not, he responded with theater, rebuilding Rome in his image, vast and personal. Desire had replaced duty. The court no longer corrected the emperor. It reflected him. Every whim became policy. Every obsession demanded sacrifice. When rulers mistake applause for destiny, reality bends until it breaks. Commodus would later carry this delusion even further. Raised in comfort, untouched by hardship, he inherited an empire built by disciplined hands. He rejected governance and embraced spectacle. He imagined himself a living god, a new Hercules, battling beasts in the arena while Rome watched in stunned silence. The empire did not fall because he fought lions. It weakened because governance became performance. Administration rotted. Corruption spread. Authority was no longer exercised, it was displayed. Across these reigns, a pattern emerges. Madness thrived where opposition vanished. Advisors survived by agreeing. Senators lived by remaining invisible. Guards followed orders without question. In such an environment, the ruler's inner world became law. Rome mistook obedience for stability. But obedience cannot correct error. It can only accelerate it. The people sensed the decay. Grain shortages worsened. Justice grew arbitrary. Loyalty became fear-driven, fragile, and brittle. When emperors confused their desires with destiny, the empire became vulnerable, not to invasion, but to neglect. History often asks whether these rulers were mad. The deeper question is simpler. What happens when a system rewards excess and punishes honesty? The answer echoes through marble corridors and ruined forums. Madness was not always a broken mind. It was permission without consequence. When an emperor ordered death, no court could refuse. When he demanded worship, no priest could deny. When he punished silence, no citizen could protest. In such a world, sanity becomes dangerous. Rome paid the price quietly at first. Trust dissolved. Institutions hollowed. Authority remained strong, but wisdom weakened. The empire could still command armies, but it struggled to command itself. Eventually, correction came the only way it could, through violence. Assassination replaced reform. The blade became the final argument. Each fallen emperor was followed by relief and dread, because nothing fundamental had changed. The throne itself invited distortion. Even capable rulers understood the risk. Some tried to surround themselves with honest voices. Others withdrew, fearing betrayal. But the structure demanded more than character. It demanded restraint built into power itself, something Rome never fully achieved. As centuries passed, the lesson grew clearer. Absolute authority does not merely rule a nation, it reshapes the mind of the one who holds it. Without resistance, thought loses weight. Without truth, perception drifts. Without limits, desire becomes law. Rome endured longer than many empires, but not without scars. Its history is not only written in battles and borders, but in the quiet unraveling of judgment at the top. In the ruins today, stones still stand where emperors once ruled unchallenged. Their names echo as warnings more than triumphs. They remind us that power, when left alone, listens only to itself. And when authority hears no answer but its own voice, madness no longer needs to be invited. It simply arrives, wearing a crown, convinced it was always meant to rule. Chapter 5: The Emperor and the Army. Before laws were carved into stone, power was learned through sound, the clash of iron, the rhythm of marching feet, the silence that followed obedience. Rome understood this truth long before it crowned emperors. Armies built the republic, defended it, and finally reshaped it. When imperial rule emerged, it did not stand upon parchment or tradition. It stood upon shields. In the shadow of the legionary camp, discipline ruled more firmly than any decree. Soldiers swore oaths not to ideals, but to men. Their loyalty followed the hand that fed them, the voice that led them, the figure who shared their danger. The empire could stretch from desert to forest, but its strength always returned to the same place, the line of soldiers waiting for orders. Augustus knew this well. His genius was not only political, but military. He placed legions along the empire's borders and ensured their pay came from him. Veterans were settled on land granted by the emperor's authority. The army became professional, loyal, and stable. Peace followed, not because Rome was just, but because it was guarded. Yet stability carried a warning. Once soldiers learned that emperors depended on them, they understood their own importance. The oath to Rome faded. The oath to the emperor sharpened. Loyalty became personal, and personal loyalty is never permanent. In distant provinces, legions waited months for news from the capital. They saw emperors as distant figures, measured by victories and payments rather than speeches. A ruler who hesitated lost respect. A ruler who failed lost everything. In the wind-scoured camps along the Rhine and the Danube, soldiers whispered comparisons. Who led bravely? Who rewarded generously? Who deserved command? These questions mattered more than Senate decrees. History records how quickly the army could decide fate. When Caligula fell, it was the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own protectors, who struck him down. They had sworn loyalty, yet loyalty had limits. The same guards then elevated Claudius, a man they believed would depend on them. In a single night, the empire learned that soldiers could choose rulers as easily as they removed them. The throne no longer belonged solely to blood or tradition. It belonged to the men with swords closest to it. Some emperors understood this and sought legitimacy through the battlefield. Trajan marched with his legions, sharing hardship and reward. His victories in Dacia expanded Rome's borders and strengthened his bond with the army. Soldiers followed him not because they feared him, but because they trusted him. Under such rulers, the empire breathed more easily. Others ruled from behind walls, distant and cautious. They relied on commanders to fight in their name. This distance proved dangerous. Generals who commanded loyalty could imagine themselves as emperors. The line between service and ambition blurred. In the 3rd century, that line vanished entirely. Rome entered an age where emperors rose and fell at the whim of legions. Frontier armies declared their own rulers. The Senate confirmed what soldiers had already decided. Crowns changed hands not through succession, but through marches on Rome. This period would be remembered as the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when the empire fractured under the weight of its own defenses. The army was both shield and executioner. Soldiers were not villains. They were products of a system that rewarded force. They followed leaders who promised survival, payment, and honor. In a world of constant threat, these needs felt sacred. When emperors failed to meet them, loyalty shifted without ceremony. Emperors responded by tightening control. They raised pay, granted privileges, and expanded the Praetorian Guard. Yet these solutions deepened the problem. The more emperors depended on soldiers, the more soldiers understood their power. Law weakened, arms ruled. Even wise rulers struggled against this reality. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher emperor, spent much of his reign in military camps, defending borders against invasion. He wrote of duty and restraint, yet ruled amid endless war. When he died, he left the throne to his son Commodus. Hopping blood would preserve stability. The army would soon reveal otherwise. As discipline softened and command faltered, respect eroded. Soldiers followed strength, not philosophy. Rome's citizens felt the shift. Taxes rose to fund armies. Justice bent to military needs. The empire's heart beat to the rhythm of marching columns, not civic debate. Peace depended on loyalty that could vanish overnight. And yet, without the army, Rome could not survive. Barbarian invasions pressed against the frontiers. Rebellion flared within. The legions stood between civilization and collapse. Emperors feared them, relied on them, and courted them endlessly. Power had become a negotiation with steel. In the late empire, reforms attempted to separate military command from imperial authority. Emperors became distant, ceremonial figures. Generals held real power. The balance shifted again, but the lesson remained unchanged. Power rested not on law, but on armed hands. In ruined forts and forgotten battlefields, the echoes still linger. Shields once locked together in defense of an idea that grew heavier than the men who carried it. Rome conquered the world, but could never fully command the force that made conquest possible. The emperor stood above all in theory. In practice, he stood upon a foundation that could move beneath him. When loyalty held, Rome stood unbroken. When it shifted, empires fell in days. This was the silent truth beneath every triumphal arch. Crowns glittered, laws endured, titles echoed, but power lived where soldiers stood ready to obey or refuse. And so Rome learned, again and again, that authority without force is fragile, but force without loyalty is fatal. Between those two truths, emperors ruled uneasily, knowing their greatest protection was also their greatest threat. In the end, the legions did not merely defend Rome, they defined it. And as long as steel decided destiny, the empire's fate would always march in step with the army that carried it. Chapter 6: Rome's Golden Illusion. Before empires learned how to fade, they learned how to shine. Rome mastered this art. From the air, its cities looked eternal, roads cutting through valleys like carved lines of fate, aqueducts carrying life across stone arches, temples rising in calm symmetry. To many who lived beneath its rule, Rome did not feel like conquest. It felt like order. Picture this: a sunrise over a provincial city. Market stalls open in measured rows. Water flows cleanly into public fountains. Soldiers stand watch, silent and disciplined. Laws are written, taxes collected, disputes settled beneath Roman roofs. For a moment, the world feels stable, as if chaos itself has been defeated. This was Rome's golden promise. Under strong emperors, the empire flourished. Augustus brought peace after generations of war. Trajan expanded borders and wealth. Hadrian secured frontiers and built walls to hold back uncertainty. Marcus Aurelius ruled with restraint, even as pressure mounted on every horizon. These men understood balance. They ruled firmly, but not blindly. They knew that peace was not absence of force, but the careful control of it. The Pax Romana stretched across continents. Merchants traveled safely from Spain to Syria. Ideas, goods, and customs flowed along Roman roads. Stone cities replaced wooden settlements. Law replaced revenge. For many, Rome felt like the end of history's violence. Yet gold, when polished, can hide fractures. Beneath the stone and ceremony, the empire strained under its own success. Roads required maintenance. Armies required payment. Cities demanded grain, water, and protection. All of this had a cost, and that cost was carried unevenly. In the shadow of prosperity, the poor felt pressure tighten. Taxes rose quietly, justified by peace. Farmers surrendered harvests to supply distant cities. Provincial wealth flowed toward Rome, feeding spectacle and administration. The empire glowed brightest at its center, while edges labored to sustain it. Peace depended on constant vigilance. Along the borders, soldiers stood year after year against threats that never fully disappeared. Germanic tribes tested the Rhine. Parthian forces watched the eastern frontier. In Britain, resistance simmered beneath occupation. Rome was calm because it was armed, and arms demanded blood. Emperors knew this. Strong rulers walked a narrow path between generosity and control. Too much pressure bred revolt. Too much leniency invited weakness. The illusion of effortless order required relentless effort. History remembers the monuments, but forgets the exhaustion. In cities, citizens gathered in forums and amphitheaters, enjoying games and grain distributions. These gifts were not merely kindness, they were policy. Bread and spectacle soothed unrest, reminding people that Rome provided. As long as supplies flowed, loyalty followed. But when disruption came, the illusion trembled. Plagues swept through crowded streets, crops failed, trade slowed. Suddenly, the machinery of order faltered. The same system that had brought stability revealed its fragility. An empire dependent on constant motion could not afford stillness. The burden fell again on emperors. Those who understood restraint held the illusion together longer. They listened, adjusted, and compromised. They accepted limits. Others mistook prosperity for permanence. They assumed Rome's greatness was unbreakable, its order self-sustaining. This belief proved dangerous. When weaker rulers inherited the system, balance slipped. Corruption grew. Taxes rose without reform. Military costs ballooned. Coinage was debased, quietly eroding trust. The gold still shone, but it rang hollow. Citizens noticed changes first in small ways. Prices rose. Justice slowed. Soldiers seemed restless. The empire still looked strong, but felt tense, like stone stretched too far. Rome's unity was real, but conditional. It existed because power enforced it and belief sustained it. When belief weakened, force increased. When force increased, resentment followed. The Golden Age had depended on consent as much as command. In the countryside, farmers struggled to meet demands. Some abandoned land. Others turned to local protection instead of imperial law. The center held, but the edges began to drift. Even the great cities showed signs of wear. Maintenance declined. Infrastructure aged. The monuments remained, but the spirit that built them grew tired. Rome had promised a world united by law. That promise required rulers who understood its cost. When emperors failed to balance strength with restraint, law hardened into pressure. Unity turned brittle. The illusion endured only, while leadership held it in place. As centuries passed, the empire faced choices it could no longer avoid. Reform or repression, adaptation or decay. Some emperors tried to mend cracks. Others ignored them, distracted by ceremony and control. The people remembered the golden years and compared them to the present. Memory sharpened disappointment. The promise of Rome became a standard the empire itself struggled to meet. Yet even in decline, the illusion lingered. Roads still stretched across the land. Laws still bore Roman names. The idea of Rome remained powerful even when reality wavered. This was its greatest achievement and its quietest trap. An empire that believes too strongly in its own permanence can mistake warning for noise. In ruins today, Rome's cities still stand as proof of what was possible. They remind us that order can be built, peace can be enforced, and unity can span continents. But they also whisper of strain hidden beneath beauty. Gold does not crack loudly, it dulls first. Rome's golden age was real, but it was never effortless. It demanded constant balance, constant restraint, constant sacrifice. When those qualities faded, the shine remained for a time, masking decay. And so the illusion endured, bright enough to inspire, fragile enough to fail. A reminder that greatness is not only built by power, but preserved by wisdom. When that wisdom fades, even the most radiant empire begins to show its seams, quietly, beneath the gold. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Senate. Before marble cracked and columns fell, Rome's oldest power learned how to survive without strength. The Senate had once ruled an empire. Now it lingered in its shadow. Stripped of command, emptied of armies, it remained seated in silence, an institution reduced but not erased. Its authority was gone, yet its memory endured, and memory in Rome could be dangerous. Picture this, a vast chamber echoing with footsteps that no longer command fear. Robes glide across polished stone. Faces remain calm, measured, unreadable. Words are chosen carefully, if spoken at all. This is not the Senate of conquest and lawmaking. This is a Senate that remembers what it once was and what the emperors have become. When imperial rule replaced the Republic, the Senate was not destroyed. Augustus understood better than most that symbols matter. He preserved the chamber, honored its titles, and allowed its rituals to continue. The Senate became a relic with breath still in its lungs. It debated, advised, and applauded, but it no longer decided. Yet shadows can still move. In the silence of ceremony, resentment grew. Senators were men of lineage, raised on stories of ancestors who had commanded legions and shaped destiny. To sit powerless beneath an emperor's gaze was a humiliation softened only by patience. They learned to wait. In the shadow of the temple, tradition whispered. Emperors sensed this unease. Though senators held no swords, their words carried weight. They shaped memory, reputation, and legitimacy. An emperor could rule by force, but he needed acceptance to endure. The Senate, though weakened, remained the voice of Rome's past. This made it dangerous. Fear settled into imperial courts. Emperors watched the Senate closely, listening for tone more than speech. A pause, a glance, a silence could signal dissent. What could not be challenged openly moved underground. Treason trials filled the void where debate once lived. Under Tiberius, accusations became tools. Senators accused senators. Loyalty was measured through denunciation. Words spoken years earlier were recalled and twisted into threats. The Senate chamber echoed not with argument, but with judgment. Executions followed carefully staged trials, each one widening the distance between ruler and tradition. History records the charge most often used: maesters, offense against the dignity of the emperor. It was a vague crime, perfectly suited for fear. To criticize policy, to mourn the past too openly, to honor republican values, any could be interpreted as betrayal. In such an atmosphere, silence became survival. Emperors feared the Senate not because it could overthrow them, but because it reminded Rome of another way to rule. The Republic lived on in memory, in ceremony, in names carved on old stone. Each senator embodied that memory. Caligula mocked the Senate openly, humiliating its members and reducing their dignity to spectacle. Nero alternated between flattery and terror. Domitian ruled with suspicion so deep that even praise felt dangerous. In each case, the Senate endured, wounded but present. Executions did not silence the chamber, they sharpened it. Each death created martyrs of memory. Each purge reminded Rome that power now feared words more than weapons. The Senate had become a mirror emperors could not fully shatter. It reflected what they lacked, tradition unarmed but enduring. Some emperors sought reconciliation. They restored honors, invited counsel, and pretended partnership. For a time, the illusion held, but illusion could not erase history. The Senate knew its place had been taken. Emperors knew they were being judged, not by votes, but by memory. In moments of weakness, whispers grew louder. When emperors faltered, through illness, defeat, or indecision, the Senate stirred. Not with open rebellion, but with expectation. They watched, waited, and recorded. They understood that emperors passed, but institutions remembered. Even when armies decided succession, the Senate confirmed it. This ritual mattered. It offered legitimacy, a bridge between force and tradition. Emperors needed that bridge, even if they resented it. The tension never resolved. Rome's ancient institutions still breathed, but only as shadows. They haunted the emperors who claimed absolute rule, reminding them that power once flowed differently. That reminder was both fragile and indestructible. In the quiet halls, senators debated not policy but survival. They mastered restraint. They spoke in careful phrases, praised cautiously, criticized obliquely. Their influence lay not in command, but in continuity. History preserved their words long after emperors fell. When tyrants died, it was often the Senate that condemned their memory, ordering names erased and statues destroyed. This was revenge delayed, but not denied, a final judgment delivered by the past. In this way, the Senate ruled after its fall. It could not stop executions, but it could define legacy. It could not prevent tyranny, but it could name it. Emperors learned this too late. Power commanded bodies. Memory commanded meaning. The Senate was Rome's conscience, weakened yet persistent. It reminded the empire that authority without tradition stands alone, and alone it is afraid. As centuries passed, the chamber grew quieter. Its role faded further, yet its presence remained a warning etched into stone. Absolute rule could never fully erase what came before. In the end, the Senate did not overthrow emperors. It outlasted them. Its whispers carried across generations, telling Rome that even when institutions are stripped of power, they still shape how power is remembered. And for rulers who claim eternity, memory is the one force they can never fully command. Thus, beneath vaulted ceilings and fading frescoes, Rome's past continued to breathe, softly, stubbornly, haunting every emperor who believed silence meant obedience and forgetting meant victory. Chapter 8: Women Behind the Throne. Before history carved names into stone, power learned how to move unseen. In Rome, authority wore armor and titles, but influence often wore silence. The empire remembered emperors, yet it was shaped just as deeply by women whose names were spoken carefully, if at all. They ruled no legions, addressed no assemblies, and issued no laws. Still, Rome bent to their patience. Picture this, a candle burning late in a palace chamber. Beyond the door, guards stand unmoving. Inside, a woman listens. She measures words, weighs futures, and considers which life must be protected and which removed. By morning, the empire will feel the consequence, though no decree will bear her name. Official history celebrated men, but power often flowed through women. Roman law denied them public authority. Custom confined them to households and lineage. Yet within those boundaries lay the levers of empire. Marriage linked dynasties. Motherhood shaped heirs. Survival demanded foresight, and foresight became strategy. Livia Drusilla understood this world better than most. Wife of Augustus, mother of an emperor, she lived at the center of Rome's transformation. She did not command. She advised. She did not rule. She endured. Ancient sources speak of her with caution, praising her virtue while hinting at darker influence. Whether these whispers reflect truth or fear matters less than their existence. They reveal Rome's discomfort with unseen power. Livia navigated succession during a time when heirs died young and suspicion grew easily. She protected her son Tiberius through patience, alliance, and restraint. When Augustus died, Tiberius inherited not just the throne, but a system stabilized by his mother's long watchfulness. Her influence did not end with her husband's life. It deepened. In the shadow of the palace, women like Livia shaped continuity. They preserved order by guiding emperors quietly, smoothing transitions, and eliminating uncertainty before it could erupt. This work required invisibility. Open ambition would have invited destruction. Agrippina the Younger embraced this lesson with sharper edges. Daughter of Germanicus, sister of Caligula, mother of Nero, her bloodline alone placed her near the center of power. But proximity was not enough. Survival required action. Agrippina married strategically, aligning herself with Emperor Claudius. She maneuvered her son Nero into adoption, elevating him above rivals. Coins bore her image alongside the emperor's, an unprecedented display. Rome watched uneasily as a woman stepped closer to visibility. Visibility, however, carries risk. When Nero ascended the throne, Agrippina expected influence to continue. For a time, it did. She guided policy, advised restraint, and shaped the early years of his reign. But emperors grow impatient with shadows. Nero sought independence. Influence turned into threat. Agrippina was removed, then erased. Her fate reflected Rome's limits. Women could guide power, but never claim it openly. The moment influence appeared too strong, it invited violence. Still, the pattern persisted. Imperial wives managed households that functioned as political hubs. They controlled access. They filtered information. A whispered warning could save a life. A delayed message could end one. Sisters and daughters became tools of alliance, traded through marriage to bind loyalty or neutralize rivals. These women learned Rome's true language, control without visibility. They understood that the empire did not move by speeches alone. It moved through inheritance, perception, and timing. A well-placed marriage could secure a border more effectively than an army. A carefully raised heir could shape decades. Even women who never sought influence were drawn into its orbit. Empresses were judged for fertility, loyalty, and silence. Failure in any brought danger. To survive, they learned caution early. History often painted them as villains or temptresses, poisoner, manipulator, seductress. These labels reflected discomfort, not reality. Rome struggled to explain power that did not fit its rules. Behind marble respectability, these women carried enormous pressure. Their lives were negotiations with mortality. One misstep could mean exile or death. Their success lay in remaining indispensable, yet unseen. In moments of crisis, their influence surfaced briefly. When emperors died unexpectedly, it was often women who stabilized succession. They calmed courts, reassured guards, and guided heirs through chaos. Their authority was informal but decisive. Even when removed, their legacy endured. The emperors shaped by these women carried traces of their influence, discipline, suspicion, ambition, or restraint. The empire felt their presence long after their names faded. Rome's denial of female authority did not prevent women from shaping history. It sharpened their methods. Excluded from open power, they mastered subtlety. They became architects of continuity in a world obsessed with command. In the ruins today, statues of emperors stand headless, worn by time. The women who guided them are harder to find. Their stories survive in fragments, accusations, and silences. Yet absence speaks. Behind every stable reign stood unseen labor. Behind every succession stood careful calculation. Behind every emperor stood a network of women navigating survival with intelligence sharpened by exclusion. Rome was not ruled by men alone. The empire's destiny flowed through hands that never held office, voices that never addressed crowds, and minds trained to endure rather than conquer. These women did not seek glory. They sought survival, and in doing so, shaped history. Their power was quiet, patient, and precise. It did not announce itself, it endured. And in that endurance lies a lasting truth. Authority does not always stand in the light. Often, it waits in shadow, guiding events with a steady hand history only notices when it is gone. Rome remembered emperors, but Rome was steered, again and again, by women behind the throne, unseen, uncredited, and indispensable to the rise and survival of empire. Chapter 9: Spectacle as Control. Before stone arenas dominated the horizon, Rome already understood the hunger of the crowd. People did not gather only for food or safety. They gathered for meaning, release, and distraction from lives shaped by labor and obedience. Long before emperors perfected control, Rome learned that attention itself was power. In the shadow of the Colosseum, this truth hardened into stone. Rising above the city like a crowned scar, the great amphitheater promised unity through awe. Its arches welcomed tens of thousands. Its corridors swallowed noise and returned it as thunder. Here, Rome did not argue, it roared. Bread and games became more than generosity. They became governance. Emperors inherited a restless population, crowded, unequal, and watchful. Laws could command obedience, but they could not command affection. Force could silence rebellion, but it could not prevent resentment. Spectacle solved what authority alone could not. It replaced anger with excitement. It transformed fear into fascination. Gladiators bled, so the empire would not. Men trained to kill entered the arena beneath painted skis and burning sun. Some were slaves, others were prisoners. A few were volunteers chasing fame in a world that offered little else. They fought not for Rome's survival, but for its mood. Each clash of steel drew cheers that drowned thought. Beasts followed, lions, bears, creatures torn from distant lands to remind the crowd of Rome's reach. Their deaths became symbols of dominion. If Rome could command nature itself, what could it not command? The crowd forgot its hunger. Emperors watched from elevated seats, measuring approval in sound. A successful ruler was not only feared, but celebrated. Applause became a language as important as loyalty. When cheers were loud, rule felt secure. When they softened, danger followed. History records how emperors expanded games during times of tension. Grain shortages were met with festivals, political unrest with longer spectacles. The solution was never reform. It was distraction. The Colosseum stood as proof. Built with the spoils of conquest, it was presented as a gift to the people. Its scale suggested generosity. Its purpose revealed calculation. While the crowd focused on death below, decisions above passed unnoticed. Entertainment became governance. This strategy worked because it spoke to something ancient. Humans are drawn to ritual violence, to stories of survival and domination. Rome did not invent this instinct, it refined it. It turned spectacle into policy. While senators debated quietly and generals planned campaigns, the people watched bodies fall. Each death offered release. Each cheer affirmed belonging. Rome became not just an empire, but a shared experience. Yet unity born of distraction is fragile. The games taught obedience through pleasure. The crowd learned when to shout, when to beg, when to demand mercy. The emperor's gesture decided life or death, reinforcing the illusion of divine authority. In this moment, power felt intimate, personal, absolute. But while attention was captured, decay advanced quietly. Infrastructure aged, borders strained, corruption deepened. Administrators enriched themselves, soldiers grew restless. None of this reached the arena floor. The roar of the crowd drowned warning. Some emperors understood the danger of excess. They limited games, fearing moral collapse. Others embraced spectacle fully, mistaking noise for stability. Commodus fought in the arena himself, believing admiration equaled loyalty. Rome cheered, but governance suffered. The people were entertained, not protected. Bread distributions followed the same logic. Free grain kept hunger at bay, but tied survival to imperial favor. Dependence replaced dignity. Gratitude replaced scrutiny. As long as the supply continued, questions faded. But systems built on constant feeding cannot endure interruption. When plagues struck, when harvests failed, when invasions disrupted trade, the illusion cracked. Crowds turned restless. The same people once pacified by spectacle demanded answers. The arena could not solve scarcity. Rome discovered that distraction delays reckoning, but never cancels it. Even the Colosseum, symbol of unity, reflected contradiction. It celebrated life through death. It honored order through chaos. It united citizens while normalizing cruelty. Over time, the spectacle hardened the public soul. Violence became expected. Mercy became rare. The empire paid for this quietly. As citizens grew accustomed to blood, empathy thinned. Governance became harsher. Executions became public lessons. Entertainment blurred into punishment. Control deepened, but trust weakened. Christian writers later condemned the games, not only for cruelty, but for what they revealed about power. A state that must distract its people constantly fears them. A ruler who relies on spectacle doubts his foundation. Rome did not fall because of games, but games revealed how Rome ruled. When leadership relied more on applause than justice, priorities shifted. Stability became performance. Peace became a show that required constant renewal. The louder the roar, the less anyone listened for cracks. In time, the games faded, resources thinned, beliefs changed. The Colosseum fell silent. Grass grew where blood once flowed, but the lesson endured. Spectacle can unite, but it can also blind. It can calm unrest, but it cannot heal decay. It buys time, not solutions. Rome mastered control through entertainment, yet paid the cost in awareness. While the people watched death for pleasure, the empire aged unnoticed. In the ruins today, the Colosseum still stands. Its arches frame the sky. Its stone remembers noise long gone. It reminds us that power often prefers distraction to reform, noise to truth. The roar has faded, but the warning remains. When governance becomes entertainment, decay advances quietly. And by the time the crowd notices the silence, the foundations have already begun to crumble. Chapter 10. Paranoia within palace walls. Before enemies gathered at the borders, fear gathered at the heart. In Rome, the most dangerous ground was not the frontier, but the palace itself. Behind walls dressed in marble and guarded by steel, emperors lived surrounded and utterly alone. In the shadow of the palace, silence became suspicious. Power promised protection, yet delivered vigilance without rest. Corridors stretched long and echoing, every footstep measured, every door a boundary between safety and death. Guards stood watch in perfect formation, but their presence did not comfort. It reminded the emperor that loyalty could be purchased, and therefore replaced. Daily life hardened into ritual. Food was tasted by others first. Wine passed through cautious hands. Letters were read twice, sometimes burned unread. Chambers were sealed at night. Even sleep felt exposed. The emperor learned to wake at small sounds, to read meaning into pauses, to sense danger in familiarity. Trust dissolved quietly. Advisors spoke carefully, knowing truth could be fatal. Praise grew exaggerated. Criticism vanished. The court became a theater of reassurance, where everyone performed loyalty and no one believed it. Faces changed often. One day a trusted counselor, the next an empty seat. The palace was not a home. It was a waiting room for betrayal. History records how paranoia reshaped rule. Tiberius withdrew from Rome, governing from the island of Capri, distant and suspicious. He trusted few, punished many, and ruled through intermediaries who amplified his fears. The Senate lived under constant accusation. Treason became a shadow that followed every word. Fear preserved his reign, but at great cost. Later emperors inherited not only authority, but anxiety. Caligula trusted no one, least of all family. Nero filled the palace with informants, listening for whispers in walls and crowds alike. Domitian sealed himself behind layers of security, walking halls designed to reveal reflections and footsteps. Each ruler believed vigilance was survival. Poison tasters became essential. Servants were rotated. Guards were bribed, then watched. The emperor's body was protected obsessively, while the mind eroded quietly. Every act of caution confirmed the belief that danger was everywhere. This fear was not irrational. History justified it. Emperors died frequently and violently. Daggers struck during games. Poison entered cups. Guards accepted bribes. Even family participated. In such a world, paranoia felt prudent. Yet fear fed upon itself. As suspicion deepened, emperors eliminated potential threats early. Friends were exiled. Relatives were executed. Generals were recalled and replaced. Each removal reduced risk and increased isolation. Power narrowed until it rested on a shrinking circle of frightened men. The palace grew quieter. Without honest counsel, decisions suffered. Bad news was softened or delayed. Reality bent under the weight of reassurance. Emperors mistook silence for stability. They governed blind, guided by fear rather than fact. The luxury surrounding them became part of the prison. Golden halls, rare art, private gardens, all existed to impress and protect. Yet they separated the ruler from the world he governed. Emperors saw Rome through filtered reports, staged appearances, and rehearsed loyalty. The city beyond the walls grew distant, almost unreal. Inside, fear ruled. Secret trials became common. Accusations were whispered, investigated quietly, resolved with sudden disappearance. Justice moved without witnesses. Names were erased. Memory itself was punished. The people sensed this darkness, even when they could not see it. Rumors spread. Trust between ruler and ruled weakened. An emperor who feared everyone inspired little loyalty. Paranoia preserved power briefly, but consumed the soul. Many emperors aged quickly, not from illness, but from vigilance. Sleep came rarely. Pleasure lost meaning. Every smile was examined for threat. Every silence felt loaded. The ruler of the world lived as a captive of his own protection. The greatest danger lay within. When fear guided decisions, enemies multiplied. Guards resented suspicion. Advisors sought escape. Loyalty, treated as temporary, became exactly that. The emperor's vigilance created the betrayal he feared. History closes the circle repeatedly. Nero fled his palace alone, abandoned by guards and friends alike. Domitian was killed by members of his own household. Commodus fell to conspiracy formed within his inner circle. Again and again, emperors died not by foreign armies, but by fear cultivated inside their walls. The palace promised safety. It delivered isolation. Over time, Rome learned a quiet truth. Absolute power does not eliminate threat. It concentrates it. The closer one stands to the throne, the sharper the blade feels. Even strong rulers felt this weight. Marcus Aurelius wrote of duty and endurance, aware that power tempted corruption and fear alike. He ruled with restraint, but could not erase the system's danger. No character could fully protect against structure. As centuries passed, emperors added more guards, more barriers, more secrecy. Each layer increased distance, not security. The palace became a fortress of anxiety. In ruins today, these walls still stand. Their stones remember footsteps that never relaxed, whispers that never faded. They remind us that fear is a poor foundation for rule. Paranoia can guard a crown for a season. It cannot guard the human spirit. Rome's emperors learned this too late. Surrounded by protection, they became prisoners. Listening for threats, they lost connection. Ruling through fear, they invited it. And so, within the safest place in the empire, danger lived closest of all. The final irony of absolute authority is this. The more tightly power is held, the more it trembles. And when fear becomes a ruler's closest companion, the walls meant to protect him begin, quietly, to close in. Chapter 11. Faith Against the Throne. Before stone temples lost their voices, belief found new paths. It did not arrive with armies or banners. It came quietly, carried by whispers, letters, and shared meals in shadowed rooms. While emperors claimed divine titles and demanded worship, another loyalty was taking root, one that did not bow to Rome. Picture this, torchlight flickering along narrow streets after dusk. A small gathering enters a private home. No statues stand at the door. No incense rises to imperial images. Inside, words are spoken softly, not to a ruler on a throne, but to a god beyond the world. In this silence, Rome's authority meets its first true limit. As emperors reached toward divinity, faith turned away from them. The Roman world was familiar with gods. It honored many. Jupiter ruled the sky. Mars guarded war. Isis crossed borders. Faith in Rome was flexible, practical, and inclusive. One god rarely denied another. Worship was civic duty as much as belief. Christianity broke this pattern. It rejected the emperor's claim to sacred status. It refused to offer sacrifice to living rulers. It declared that ultimate authority belonged not to Caesar, but to a higher power unseen and eternal. To Rome, this was not merely religion, it was defiance. In the shadow of the temple, loyalty had always been visible. Now it disappeared. Christians met in secret. They refused public rituals. They avoided festivals honoring emperors. Their silence unsettled officials. A citizen who would not worship the emperor was not just irreverent, he was unreliable. Persecution followed. At first it was local and uneven. Some governors ignored the movement. Others punished it harshly. Rome did not seek belief, it sought conformity. A pinch of incense offered to the emperor would have ended most accusations. Christians refused. History records the fear that followed disasters. When fire consumed Rome under Nero, suspicion searched for a target. Christians, already misunderstood, became convenient. Executions were staged publicly. Bodies burned as symbols of control. Rome believed terror would end belief. It misunderstood faith. Martyrdom did not erase Christianity, it deepened it. Each execution transformed death into testimony. Stories traveled faster than soldiers. Faith spread not through force, but through endurance. In arenas where gladiators died for spectacle, believers died for conviction. The crowd watched, unsettled. These victims did not beg, they did not curse Rome. They accepted death with calm resolve. The empire could command bodies, but not souls. Emperors responded with cycles of repression. Decius demanded universal sacrifice, testing loyalty through ritual. Diocletian ordered scriptures burned and churches destroyed. The machinery of empire turned against belief, confident in its reach. Yet belief adapted. Christians hid texts, they memorized words, they rebuilt quietly. The more Rome demanded worship, the clearer the contrast became. Authority enforced through fear met loyalty sustained by hope. The turning point came not through conquest, but exhaustion. Centuries of persecution failed to erase faith. Instead, Christianity grew within the empire's own structure. Soldiers converted, officials converted, even members of imperial households listened in secret. The throne began to feel pressure not from rebellion, but from persistence. Then came Constantine. After civil war and uncertainty, he emerged victorious, claiming divine favor, not from Rome's old gods, but from the Christian one. His conversion did not immediately end all conflict, but it changed everything. Persecution stopped. Churches rose openly. Faith stepped into the light. The throne did not fall, it adapted. Christianity, once hunted, became sanctioned. Later emperors embraced it fully. Pagan temples closed. Emperor worship faded. The very system that demanded divine honor now knelt before a belief it once tried to destroy. Rome had reached a reckoning. By claiming divinity, emperors had challenged heaven itself. Christianity offered an answer Rome could not silence. A ruler could demand obedience, but belief answered only to conviction. In this struggle, Rome revealed its limits. Law could punish, armies could kill, spectacle could distract, but faith endured where force failed. The empire learned too late that sacred authority cannot be manufactured. It must be believed. In ruins today, churches stand beside fallen temples. Crosses rise where imperial statues once loomed. Stone remembers the shift even when names fade. The emperors who demanded worship are gone. The faith they feared remains. And so history leaves us with a quiet revelation. Power can rule the world, but belief reshapes it. When authority commands the body and faith commands the soul outlasts the crown. Rome conquered nations, faith conquered Rome. Not with fire or steel, but with conviction strong enough to endure silence, suffering, and time itself. Chapter 12. The Burden of Endless Borders. Before Rome feared collapse, it feared distance. The empire had grown so wide that the horizon itself became an enemy. What once promised glory now demanded vigilance without rest. From frozen rivers in the north to burning sands in the east, Rome's borders stretched like an open wound, vast, exposed, and never fully healed. Picture this, a dawn breaking over a frontier fort. Frost clings to shields. Smoke rises from campfires where soldiers stir awake, far from home. Beyond the walls, unknown lands wait in silence. Somewhere in this harsh place stands an emperor, wrapped in a cloak, ruling the world from a tent of leather and iron. This was the price of greatness. Rome's expansion had been swift and confident. Conquest brought wealth, slaves, and prestige. Each victory fed the belief that Rome was destined to rule all it touched. Borders were pushed outward again and again, celebrated with triumphs and arches. Yet borders once claimed must be held, and holding them became the empire's greatest burden. Frontiers demanded constant defense. Legions could not rest. Forts had to be supplied. Roads had to be maintained. Garrisons required pay, grain, and replacements. The farther Rome expanded, the more fragile its hold became. Emperors understood this painfully well. They spent years away from the capital, traveling from one threatened edge to another. The palace was replaced by camps. Marble halls gave way to mud, wind, and watchfires. Rulers who commanded millions slept listening for alarms in the night. Marcus Aurelius spent much of his reign along the Danube, fighting wars he never sought. He wrote of duty while watching soldiers die in foreign forests. His reign was not defined by conquest, but by endurance. Victory brought only temporary peace. The enemy always returned. In the east, the Parthian Empire tested Rome's strength. Battles shifted borders back and forth, draining men and treasure. No victory was final. No frontier was quiet for long. Rome had built an empire too large to be still. Each border crisis demanded attention. When emperors focused on one front, another weakened. Rebellion followed absence. Invasions followed neglect. The empire felt like a body stretched beyond its limits, muscles strained, breath shallow. The people felt the cost. Taxes rose to fund armies that never returned home. Farmers lost sons to distant wars. Cities waited months for imperial decisions made far away. The center ruled an empire it could barely see. Expansion, once a source of pride, now required sacrifice without end. Some emperors tried to halt the growth. Hadrian built walls instead of crossing them. He accepted limits, choosing defense over ambition. His reign showed wisdom, but also revealed fear. Rome had reached a point where it could not grow without weakening itself. Yet stopping did not end pressure. Enemies learned Rome's boundaries. They tested them relentlessly. Tribes moved, united, adapted. The empire faced not chaos, but resistance shaped by Rome's own example. Soldiers stood watch year after year, guarding lines that shifted with each season. Morale faltered. Loyalty weakened. Veterans returned home changed, carrying stories of endless war without triumph. The emperor bore this weight personally. He was expected to be everywhere at once, to inspire troops, to reassure cities, to decide quickly and correctly. Failure on a border was not just military loss, it was political danger. A defeated emperor invited rebellion. Power no longer rested in Rome alone. It lived where legions stood. As borders strained, internal stability suffered. Governors gained autonomy, generals grew ambitious, communication slowed, unity weakened, the empire's size became a liability. History marks this shift clearly. Rome did not fall suddenly, it thinned. Resources stretched, authority fragmented, defense consumed energy once used for innovation and reform. The empire survived, but at increasing cost. The crown grew heavier. Emperors aged on campaign. Some died far from Rome, never seeing the city they ruled. Their victories were temporary, their sacrifices permanent. Expansion had promised immortality, it delivered exhaustion. Even the idea of Rome began to change. The capital lost its central role. New centers emerged closer to frontiers. Power followed necessity. The empire adapted, but adaptation revealed decline. In the end, Rome faced a truth it could not escape. No empire can expand forever. Borders demand more than ambition. They demand limits. Rome's greatness had carried it across the world. Its vastness now pressed back, demanding blood, gold, and constant attention. The world Rome ruled weighed heavily upon the ruler himself. In ruined forts and broken walls today, the silence tells the story. These places were once the edge of everything. Men stood here believing they guarded civilization. They did, for a time. The burden of endless borders taught Rome its final lesson. Power gained through expansion must be sustained through sacrifice. When that sacrifice becomes endless, greatness turns inward and begins to break. The imperial crown still gleamed, but beneath it lay weariness. A ruler could command armies, but not distance, could claim lands, but not peace. And so, at the far edges of the known world, Rome discovered the quiet cost of empire. The wider it reached, the heavier it became, until even the strongest shoulders could no longer bear the weight of the world. Chapter 13. Decline behind marble faces. Before empires fell, they learned how to pretend. Rome perfected this art. Its statues still stood tall, faces carved in calm confidence, eyes fixed on eternity. Marble shone in the sun. Coins bore imperial likenesses. Titles echoed through ceremony. Yet beneath the stone, something vital had begun to thin. In the shadow of the temple, grandeur remained, but belief wavered. Rome did not collapse in a single moment. There was no final scream, no sudden darkness. What came instead was erosion, slow, relentless, invisible to those who expected catastrophe to announce itself. Authority once carried weight because it promised continuity. Emperors ruled knowing their decisions would echo across generations. Now, permanence vanished. Rulers rose and fell with alarming speed. Some reigned for years, others for months. A few vanished so quickly their names barely reached the provinces. The crown no longer felt eternal. It felt temporary. History marks this age with confusion. Emperors proclaimed reforms they could not complete. Laws were issued, then reversed. Policies shifted with each new ruler. Loyalty fractured because no one knew which authority would survive long enough to reward it. In this uncertainty, corruption flourished. Officials enriched themselves quickly, unsure how long their position would last. Governors ruled like kings in distant provinces, sending loyalty only when it served them. Soldiers followed commanders who promised stability, not emperors whose reigns felt fleeting. Rome's institutions still functioned, but without confidence. Bureaucracy replaced conviction. Orders were obeyed out of habit, not belief. The people noticed. In cities, statues of forgotten emperors stood awkwardly, names scratched away or replaced. Monuments meant to inspire instead confused. Which ruler should be honored? Which laws still mattered? Memory blurred as quickly as succession. Coins told the story best. Faces changed rapidly. Titles grew exaggerated, desperate attempts to project strength. Each new emperor claimed restoration, renewal, return to greatness. The words sounded familiar. The results rarely followed. Rome was tired. Decades of war, plague, and economic strain had thinned resilience. The empire had been asked to endure endlessly. Now endurance faltered. Taxes rose to support armies and administration. Currency weakened. Trust in the system eroded quietly. Leadership struggled to adapt. Some emperors tried reform. They reorganized provinces, strengthened defenses, and restructured governance. Their efforts mattered, but time was short. Instability erased progress faster than wisdom could apply it. The true enemy was not invasion. It was uncertainty. Barbarian pressures existed, but Rome had faced them before. What changed was internal cohesion. When authority fractured, defense followed. When loyalty weakened, borders opened. Emperors became symbols rather than anchors. They wore crowns heavier than their influence. They commanded titles that no longer commanded obedience. Power remained vast in theory, fragile in practice. In the palaces, luxury persisted, but confidence did not. Rulers surrounded themselves with ceremony to mask insecurity. Triumphs were staged. Festivals continued. The image of empire was preserved even as its foundation thinned. The people sensed the contradiction. Faith shifted further away from imperial identity. Local loyalties strengthened. Communities relied on bishops, generals, or local leaders rather than distant emperors. Rome's universal promise narrowed. Even the army reflected this change. Soldiers defended regions rather than the idea of empire. Allegiance became practical. The notion of a single, unbroken Rome faded into abstraction. Statues still stood proud, but they no longer spoke. Marble cannot adapt, empires must. Rome had once thrived because it could change without losing itself. Now change came too quickly, without direction. Stability required time, and time was scarce. Names of emperors from this era blur together. Many are remembered only by historians, some not at all. Their reigns left few marks beyond confusion. Authority lost meaning when it lost continuity. The Senate still met, laws were still written, armies still marched, but coordination weakened, purpose fragmented. Rome did not fall from the sky. It settled downward, like a structure sinking into soft ground. In the countryside, abandoned villas hinted at economic decline. In cities, maintenance slowed. Roads cracked, aqueducts leaked. These were not symbols of defeat, but of neglect. The empire aged. Some looked back to the golden years with longing. Others accepted change as inevitable. Few understood how deeply instability cut. When no ruler lasts, no vision lasts. When leadership feels temporary, loyalty does too. The illusion of permanence had been Rome's greatest strength. Its loss was devastating. By the time invasions pressed harder, the empire was already weakened. The walls did not fail because enemies were stronger, but because belief was thinner. Defense without unity cannot endure. History often seeks villains. Rome's decline offers few. It was not a single tyrant, not a single battle. It was exhaustion layered over generations. The empire had given everything it had. What remained was memory. In ruins today, marble faces still gaze outward, expressions unchanged. They remind us how power once appeared unbreakable. They also remind us that appearance is not endurance. Rome's greatest enemy was not fire or steel. It was instability, the slow unraveling of trust, continuity, and purpose. Empires do not need destruction to end. They only need time without renewal. Rome stood longer than most, but even stone yields to wear. When authority loses meaning, when leadership loses permanence, greatness fades without noise. The statues remain, the empire does not. And in that quiet contrast lies the final lesson of Rome's long decline. That endurance is not carved in marble, but sustained by stability. And once stability erodes, even the mightiest civilization begins to disappear, silently, behind its own proud face. Chapter 14. Last Crowns of the West. Before empires vanished, they learned how to linger. In the western half of Rome, power did not end with a clash of armies or a burning city. It thinned, it drifted, it forgot itself. The crown still existed, but it no longer commanded the world it claimed to rule. In the shadow of crumbling walls, the empire entered its final season. By the 5th century, the West was Rome in name more than in strength. Emperors still sat on thrones, still wore purple, still issued decrees stamped with ancient authority. Yet their words traveled slowly and returned unanswered. The machinery of empire remained, but its energy had drained away. Power had already moved elsewhere. Generals commanded armies that no longer felt Roman. Germanic leaders negotiated as equals, not subjects. Kings ruled provinces once governed by imperial law. The emperor stood at the center of a world that no longer revolved around him. The throne remained, command faded. In Ravenna, the western capital, emperors lived behind marshes and walls, distant from the old heart of Rome. They ruled carefully, cautiously, often under protection of stronger men. Their reigns were short, uncertain, and easily forgotten. The title of emperor survived longer than imperial authority itself. Rome citizens felt this change daily. Taxes were irregular, protection uneven. Laws differed from region to region. People relied on local leaders, bishops, and warlords more than distant rulers. The idea of empire became memory rather than presence. Barbarian invasions did not arrive suddenly. They had been part of Rome's world for generations. What changed was Rome's ability to respond. Armies were too few, resources too thin, loyalty too fractured. When cities fell, they were often negotiated away rather than stormed. The sack of Rome no longer carried the shock it once would have. The city had already lost its political soul. Its monuments stood, but governance had moved on. When Alaric entered Rome, the world gasped, but Rome itself endured quietly, wounded but alive. The empire did not rally, it adjusted. By the time the last Western emperor took the throne, the role was almost ceremonial. Romulus Augustulus, a boy bearing names heavy with irony, ruled an empire that barely existed. He commanded no legions. He decided no great policy. He represented continuity without power. When the general Odoacer deposed him in 476 CE, there was no great outcry. The Senate did not resist, the people did not riot. Life continued. Odoacer did not destroy Rome. He ruled Italy in its name, sending imperial symbols eastward as if returning borrowed authority. The Eastern Emperor remained. The idea of Rome survived, just not in the West as it once had. The age of Western emperors ended without spectacle. This quiet ending reveals more than any dramatic fall could. Rome had already changed beyond recognition. Its institutions lingered, but belief had shifted. The empire no longer felt necessary. People adapted quickly. Local rule replaced distant command. Churches filled spaces once held by imperial administration. Kings offered protection where emperors could not. Memory softened loss. The empire ended not with resistance, but resignation. Ruins became familiar companions. Marble cracked, statues fell, roads aged, yet life went on. Markets opened, children grew, faith replaced imperial identity. Rome became history while people still lived among its remains. The East continued to call itself Roman for centuries, preserving law and ceremony. But the West accepted transformation. The imperial crown became legend, not ambition. Rome's story did not conclude in silence because it had already spoken for too long. Centuries of command had reshaped the world. Now the world reshaped Rome. The empire that once defined civilization became one thread among many. Its fall felt less like loss and more like transition. In time, poets would mourn it. Historians would debate it. Rulers would claim its legacy. But those who lived through its end experienced something quieter, a gradual release from an identity that no longer protected them. The last crowns of the West were worn without illusion. They rested on heads that knew power had moved on. The throne remained as a symbol of continuity, but continuity itself had changed shape. Rome did not die in flames. It faded into memory, stone by stone, law by law, crown by crown. In the ruins today, one can still walk streets laid by imperial hands. One can still trace the outlines of forums and palaces. These remains do not shout of conquest. They whisper of endurance. The Western Empire ended because it no longer needed to exist as it once had. Its people found new ways to live, rule, and believe. The world did not collapse. It transformed. And so the final lesson emerges quietly. Empires fall not only when they are defeated, but when they are outgrown. When symbols remain but meaning departs, when crowns persist but command dissolves, the end arrives without struggle. Rome's last emperors ruled an age, already passing into legend. The crowns were set down, the world moved forward. And in that quiet acceptance, the greatest empire of the ancient world stepped out of history, not as a ruin of fire and screams, but as a memory fading gently into the long echo of time. Chapter 15. Echoes of Imperial Ambition. Before empires vanished, they learned how to leave traces. Rome mastered this as well. Though its legions faded and its crowns were set aside, its presence did not disappear. It settled into stone, into law, into language. Long after the empire ended, Rome continued to speak. In the shadow of fallen arches, the world listened. Rome's power had never rested solely in armies or emperors. It lived in ideas, order imposed upon chaos, law written to outlast rulers, ambition shaped into system. When the empire dissolved, these ideas did not fall with it. They traveled forward, carried by memory, imitation, and desire. The emperors were gone. Their influence was not. Across Europe and beyond, new kingdoms rose among Roman ruins. Roads still guided movement. Cities followed Roman plans. Law codes echoed Roman principles. Even those who claimed to reject Rome borrowed from it. To rule was to resemble what Rome had been. In this way, the empire survived its own death. Rome taught the world how power could organize millions. It showed how governance could stretch across cultures, languages, and borders. Its administration was imperfect, often brutal, yet enduring. The idea that authority could be structured, recorded, and transmitted became one of Rome's greatest legacies. But Rome also left warnings. Its emperors stood as examples of what ambition could achieve and what it could ruin. Augustus became the model of controlled authority. Caligula and Nero became symbols of excess. Marcus Aurelius embodied restraint. Commodus revealed decay. Each ruler added a chapter to a larger lesson. History remembered them not just as individuals, but as mirrors. Later rulers studied Rome closely. Medieval kings styled themselves as emperors. Charlemagne revived the imperial title, seeking legitimacy through Roman memory. The Holy Roman Empire claimed Rome's name long after Rome itself had vanished. Even distant rulers adopted Roman imagery to project permanence. They understood the power of association. Roman law shaped courts centuries later. Concepts of citizenship, property, and governance bore Roman fingerprints. Latin endured as the language of scholarship and faith. Rome's voice softened over time, but it never fully fell silent. Yet the empire's darker echoes traveled as well. Centralized power tempted later states, as it had tempted Rome. Absolute authority promised efficiency and unity. History repeatedly tested this promise, and often repeated Rome's mistakes. Leaders who claimed destiny, demanded worship, or silenced dissent walked paths Rome had already marked. The emperors became warnings written in stone. Rome taught humanity that greatness and destruction often grow from the same root. Ambition builds roads and cities. It also builds hierarchies that strain the human spirit. Power creates order. It also invites corruption. These contradictions did not vanish with the empire. In every age, societies return to Rome for answers: how to rule diverse peoples, how to balance strength and restraint, how to preserve order without crushing belief. Rome offered examples, but not solutions without cost. Its story endured because it was incomplete. Rome did not solve the problem of power. It revealed it. The ruins themselves became teachers. Travelers walked through broken forums and asked how something so vast could fade. Scholars debated causes: moral decay, economic strain, invasion, instability. The truth remained complex, layered, human. Rome fell because it was human. Its emperors were not monsters or gods. They were people magnified by authority. Their virtues shone brighter. Their flaws cut deeper. Through them, Rome revealed what happens when human ambition is given the weight of the world. This is why their stories endure. They are not relics, they are reflections. Modern states still wrestle with Rome's questions: how much power should rest in one hand, how law should serve people rather than dominate them, how stability can survive without freedom becoming fragile. Rome stands behind these debates like a distant voice. Its legacy is not triumph alone, it is caution. The empire showed that systems can outlast individuals, but only if belief sustains them. When trust erodes, even the strongest structures weaken. When ambition outruns wisdom, greatness becomes burden. Rome's emperors believed they ruled history. History judged them instead. Yet Rome also offered hope. It proved that order can emerge from chaos, that shared law can unite strangers, that ideas can survive collapse. Even in ruin, Rome inspired rebuilding. Its memory fueled renaissance as much as regret. The echoes of imperial ambition still shape humanity's search for rule and order. They remind us that power is never neutral. It reflects those who wield it. It magnifies intention. It records consequence. In the quiet of ruined amphitheaters and silent palaces, Rome continues to speak, not loudly, not clearly, but persistently. Its story warns and invites at once. To build, but to question. To rule, but to restrain. To remember that greatness without balance carries its own end. Rome taught the world that power could shape civilization, and that civilization must shape power in return. The empire is gone, the lesson remains. And in every age that seeks order through ambition, Rome's shadow stretches forward, reminding humanity that the rise of greatness and the seed of collapse are often carved from the same stone. The echo has not faded. It waits, whispering through law, ambition, and memory, asking each new generation whether it has learned what Rome once ruled and ultimately revealed. Conclusion: when power outlives its masters. Before the dust settles over fallen empires, before stone forgets the hands that shaped it, power remains. It lingers in memory, in consequence, in the long echo left behind by those who once commanded the world. Rome learned this truth across centuries of rule, collapse, and remembrance. In the shadow of abandoned palaces, silence speaks louder than triumph. The Roman emperors ruled lands without horizon. Their decrees crossed seas. Their images were carved into marble and pressed into coin, meant to defy time itself. Yet for all their authority, they faced a struggle no legion could win, the struggle to rule their own nature. Power did not transform these men into something new. It revealed what was already there. In some, authority magnified discipline, patience, and restraint. Vision hardened into law. Ambition bent toward stability. Under such rulers, Rome felt ordered, almost timeless. Roads stretched farther, borders held longer, and people believed for a moment that history had found its balance. In others, power awakened fear and hunger. Desire eclipsed duty. Suspicion replaced trust. What began as command dissolved into obsession. The same throne that could support greatness also magnified weakness until weakness became policy. This is Rome's enduring lesson. Power is not a force that stands apart from humanity. It is a mirror. It reflects the heart that holds it, enlarging both virtue and flaw. Where wisdom exists, power can protect. Where insecurity lives, power corrodes. The emperors learned this too late. Surrounded by guards, titles, and ceremony, many lived isolated lives, haunted by betrayal and doubt. They commanded armies, yet trusted no one. They were praised endlessly, yet believed nothing. Their crowns glittered, but weighed heavily, pressing fear into every decision. History remembers their names, but not for the glory they claimed. It remembers the cost. Rome itself endured longer than most empires because it adapted, absorbed, and rebuilt. Yet even Rome could not escape the truth written into its rulers' lives. Control without restraint cannot last. Authority without accountability devours itself. The emperors are gone now. Their palaces stand broken, their statues weathered. Yet their story survives because it speaks beyond Rome. Every age that seeks order wrestles with the same temptation, the belief that power alone can secure stability. Rome shows where that path leads when restraint fades. It shows how easily strength becomes excess, how quickly command turns inward, how permanence dissolves into fear. The lesson is quiet, but enduring. History does not remember emperors for the breadth of their empires. It remembers them for what they became once no one could refuse them. Crowns fade, titles vanish. What remains is character revealed under pressure. In the end, Rome's emperors ruled the world, but could not rule themselves. Their lives stand as a warning carved deeper than stone, that power outlives its masters and judges them long after they are gone. The empire fell, the mirror remains. And every generation that reaches for control without restraint finds Rome waiting there, silent and patient, asking the same ancient question: what will power reveal in you?